In today's episode, we catch a boat to an island to then drive to the middle of nowhere in order to find the only ever Scottish supercar. Enjoy. That's our car. That's the boat going. We missed it. We're on the next one in an hour, but, not great. Here we go. Right, next challenge. Is the car going to get on the ferry?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Oh gosh, do we know?
Look at all these fools late for their booking. Who would do that? Okay, so what are we doing on the boat? We're off to the Isle of Mull, and we're off there to see something damn important for Scottish automotive history, yet no one actually knows much about it. It's a car, and it's a car so rare I could only track two down, not just in the country of Scotland, but in all of the UK. Let me tell you a little bit about it before we actually go and find one. So, what's got four wheels, cost more than a Ferrari, and like many Scottish babies, was conceived after one too many drams of whiskey. The Argyll Turbo GT. Here's a 6-minute history of it. The Argyll Turbo GT is Scottish. Very, very Scottish. In fact, it's so damn Scottish, it was named over a dram of whiskey. The car was the brainchild of Andrew Smith and Bob Henderson, and it was while they were sat at Smith's kitchen table, discussing the prospect of making Scotland's first ever supercar in around 1974, over a glass of single malt scotch, that they decided the car company had to be called Argyle. The name was chosen in tribute to a previously named Argyll Motors, which produced cars between 1899 and 1928. Choosing that name, a name that was well loved and respected, immediately added high expectations to the project. So Bob Henderson, who was the boss of Argyle and the man in charge of engineering the car, set a list of goals he believed the car needed to fill in order to be exceptional. The car needed good visibility and had to have a spacious interior. It had to be mid-engined and it must be easy to maintain, and it needed to be built to a high enough quality to last 30 years. So he got to work. We'll see how good the visibility of the car is when we take a look around it shortly. However, we can be fairly certain that the interior was spacious, as there was room enough in the car to give it rear seats. And not just in a Porsche 911 can't even fit your legless gran in the back way, but proper, usable rear seats. What this 2+2 layout meant though, was that the car carried some unusual dimensions. It was almost 4.7 meters long, the same as a Mitsubishi Outlander, yet it's lower than a Ferrari 812 Superfast. And the wheelbase? Well, it's longer than a second generation transit van. Fortunately, it was made to handle a little better than a transit van though. The car's chassis is a complexity of steel tubing bent and welded into what's known as a birdcage design. A design championed by Maserati in the 1960s, and named so as it's so complicated it looks like a birdcage, with bits of metal everywhere. And in order to make sure this steel survived at least 3 decades, Bob Henderson coated the chassis in a primer that was made for oil rigs in the North Sea. And even more interestingly, in order for this primer to be really effective in protecting the steel, it has to be applied to already slightly rusted metal. So technically, the Argyll Turbo GT was built with a rusty chassis. This rusty steel was put through its paces before being deemed roadworthy though, as throughout its development the car was test driven on rally forest tracks around the small fishing town of Loch Gilfed, where the car was dreamt up and produced. Plus, in an effort to prove just how strong the chassis was, Bob Henderson himself drove an Argyll Turbo GT test car into a brick wall at 40 miles an hour in order to certify its safety. The car is capable of considerably more than just 40 miles an hour though, thanks to the Turbo GT's turbo powertrain. The car was given a 2.7 litre V6 engine with a single turbocharger that could supposedly send the Turbo GT to a still impressive 160 miles per hour, but supposedly is absolutely the word to use here, as Argyle never released any precise 0 to 60 official top speed or even horsepower figures. It's thought that the V6 turbocharged engine produces around 230 brake horsepower, but even if that is enough to send the car to 160 miles per hour, the Turbo GT couldn't, as from new it was fitted with wheels and tyres that were only rated up to 130 miles per hour. The V6 engine did have a couple of very positive attributes though. Firstly, it ticks another 2 of Mr. Henderson's requirements for the car. It was placed in the back of the car, before the rear wheels, making the Turbo GT mid-engined, and because it's the same engine that was used in certain Volvos, Renaults and Peugeots, it was also easy to maintain, as off-the-shelf components were easy to come across. Well, fairly easy anyway, as if something went wrong with your turbo, you would have to take it back to Argyle, as it was one of their own making. However, the impracticality of the turbo is more than made up for by its party piece. In fact, the whole car's party piece. A no-lag turbo. Bob Henderson has kept the technical details on how the no-lag turbo works a secret, but the thing that's important here is that it worked. In fact, the whole car did. Critics couldn't find much to fault in the Turbo GT's driving experience. The car was quick, the turbo really did seem to have no lag, and whilst at over 1500 kilograms it was heavy, because it had a 50-50 weight distribution, the car handled really nicely, and it was comfortable over the bumps too, despite being on such skinny tyres. But there is an aspect of the Turbo GT that is very controversial, and you probably noticed it as soon as I placed down the first photo of the car. So let's go, find this Scottish beast, have a look around the car and address the elephant in the room. The aesthetics.
Left here. Left here. Left and onwards.
We are very close.
Keep going around, I think. So we are literally in the middle of nowhere, on an island in the middle of nowhere. And we're hoping they've got the car here somewhere. We made it. Questionable roads, as you quite...
Yeah, there's a few bumps and scrapes along the way.
Yeah. Part of the adventure though, this car has been like a unicorn. It's been so hard to track down, but we have done, and we've been told where it is. It's just in that barn behind us, right there, and the doors are open, and they're just ready to let us go have a look. So, let's do it. Okay. Are you excited? Whoa! First thing to address is the audio. We can't do anything about that. This is on a working farm, so we're just going to put up with that. Never mind, the audio stopped. That was pretty great. But this is in a barn, so this is technically a barn find, I guess. Although that gives it... We didn't stumble upon this. This took weeks to track down. So I want to talk about the second clear thing. Is the headlights. You may have noticed they're different from the pictures of the car in the onboard video. There's a good reason for that. This is a prototype car. This is the first Argyll Turbo GT they ever made, and therefore this is what they used to develop it. This is what they used to iron out all the kinks, and one of the differences is the headlights. The production version has slats here. And the reason for the slats was they put them on for style reasons, and then Bob Henderson and Andrew Smith found that due to the aerodynamics, they were no longer having the problem of flies on the headlights. Instead, the flies were all shooting over. So they realised this improved aerodynamics and made the car much easier to live with, and therefore whilst the pre-production version here doesn't have the slats, every Argyll Turbo GT that followed did. Should we get the doors open?
Yes, no, I think we'll be able to get this door open. That one's a bit close to the pillar.
Oh, that's a bit... Okay.
It's got seals about the same width as the VX220.
Emergency pasty.
A lamb pasty.
Stops him from being nasty.
Well, it does. It doesn't make me hungry. But
Okay, while you're eating, I can show you something cool about this car.
okay, far away.
The rear view mirror. Give it a look.
Oh wow, yeah. Goes into this tube, fiberglass tube tunnel.
So they call this the optic trough. And due to the fact that at the back of the car the slats were there and it really made rear visibility quite poor, they decided instead to kind of bring the roof down in the middle and install a little window there, and then the rear view mirror can look out through that instead.
Oh, similar to the early Lamborghini Countaches that had a periscope style design, I believe.
There you go. So they were pretty proud of that, and I don't know, well, you can tell me how it works. How does it look?
It's actually, you know what, pretty good. I mean, you do see a bit of this fiberglass tunnel. It's kind of blocking your mirror a little bit, but actually, yeah, in terms of visibility, it's fine. And actually, visibility as a whole in the car is really good. You've got a great big windscreen there, and I mean, you could fit anyone in here because, although I can't get the seat back, I think the rails are seized. But I've got probably a good 4 or 5 inches. Look, I could take the seat back. I'm 6'2", and this seat position is actually fine for me. So you could get someone much taller in here easily, and there's a good width to the car, so you're not going to struggle for shoulder room either.
I believe those are prototype windows. Another thing which is very different about this prototype car than the finished version is the quality of the interior. One of the things they were really, really proud about was how nice the interior was. They realised that this is kind of going to be almost a land yacht. Yes. And therefore they actually spent a third of the cost of the car on the interior. One of the biggest differences, of course, between this prototype version and the finished version is the lack of seats behind you.
Yes.
So
you've got a monster V8, is it behind here?
Bingo, V8.
No, I've got plastic all over me. I'm eating off the old seats because I'm not wasting this lamb.
Okay. Can I carry on?
Carry on.
Thank you.
After the pasty catastrophe, I decided a voiceover may serve better to talk about this car. So back to the engine. As Richard mentioned, behind the front seats is a V8 engine. A turbocharged Rover V8 engine to be precise. The turbocharging was done by Bob Henderson's other vehicular company, Minnow Fish, and early reports suggested this engine and turbo combination could power the Turbo GT to a top speed close to 200 miles per hour. However, it's the size of it all that really catches your attention when you look into the engine bay. The engine and gearbox stretch long into the chassis, taking up almost half the length of the entire car. It left no room for anyone but the driver and a single passenger. This was not to be the case for long though, as during development, when the designs were shown to potential customers, everyone felt that the V8 was a bit of a waste of space, and those interested in the car would rather have a smaller V6 block, again turbocharged, if it meant they could also have 2 rear seats. As a result, only one V8 Argyll Turbo GT was ever made. This one. Now it's time to address the blue elephant in the room. The looks. I've shown many people photos of the Argyll Turbo GT and the overall response is not positive. Bob Henderson and Andrew Smith were very proud to tell the world that no foreign designers had been employed to style the Turbo GT. And whilst at some angles, and with some parts of the car out of view, it doesn't look so bad, I can't help but feel that maybe they should have shunned their Scottish heritage a tad and employed a foreign stylist. Or any stylist for that matter, as you get the feeling the Turbo GT was designed solely by engineers. But of course that's an opinion, so please don't take my word for it. So after spending a few hours looking around the Argyll Turbo GT, it can be described as a car with some very clever features, and also some fairly hefty drawbacks. But did the good outweigh the bad in the eyes of the consumer? Did it sell well? I think we all know the answer to that question.
No, it didn't. Much like with the car's power and speed, Argyll have always been cagey about production numbers. But it's genuinely thought that fewer than 10 Turbo GTs were sold, possibly closer to 5. But why? 3 reasons. Number 1. The car arrived late. Argyll first told the world about the Turbo GT in around 1976, but due to financial issues, development took 8 years, during which the Turbo GT went from being a 200 mile an hour monster to being capable of just 130 miles per hour. People weren't willing to wait around for almost a decade for that. Number 2, the price. When finally launched at Inverary Castle in October of 1983, the car was priced at £28,000. That's expensive. That's £10,000 more than a Lotus Esprit Turbo, £5,000 more than a Porsche 911 Turbo. It's even a couple of grand more than a Ferrari 308 GTB, which is, well, it's a Ferrari. And that brings me on to the third reason, the looks. Deep down, we're all shallow, and what would you rather see in your driveway? A fiberglass car that's made in an outhouse, or a Ferrari? Exactly. Argyll did want to sell more than they could, and I do believe that in many ways the Turbo GT is a failure. But not in every way, and not in the most important way. You see, with the Argyll Turbo GT, Bob Henderson and Andrew Smith created a legacy. They made a car, but not just any car. They made a supercar, and not even just any supercar, but the first Scottish supercar the world had ever seen. And when you think back to them sitting at that kitchen table nursing a dram of scotch, isn't that what they set out to do in the first place? Nice.
Thanks for watching episode 3. Tune in tomorrow when we find the location of a massacre so bloody it inspired a scene in Game of Thrones, share some of the VX220's main flaws, and explore one of the UK's greatest natural wonders. In the meantime, please do consider subscribing to my channel should you want to be kept up to date with my newest videos. Thanks.